So, since the Conservative National Conference, Conservative Home has been running a constant series of articles called Reducing Demand for Government. And these articles have consisted of how we can go in and essentially just remove the state entirely so that the government does nothing at all. And at that point, you've got to realize, well, what's the government for? Defense, you know, the economy. Some of these articles have really been the height of true wackiness. Now, I haven't covered them for good reasons. Some of these articles are so ridiculous, so ludicrous in their nature. I could not sit there and take them seriously as they were meant to be. And maybe I could have done a video mocking some of these arguments. I mean, the one about housing is particularly hilarious, where they insist that the government and local authorities should have nothing to do with housing whatsoever, and instead there should be private companies set up to deal with the social housing crisis, as if that is somehow going to make everything better. But that is ultimately what is at the core of all these articles. Take something the government already does and we pay taxes for, and let a private company do it. So today we're going to have a look at just one piece of this, because this undercovers something that is going on deep in the Conservative Party, to a point where I have to ask, can you really call this the Conservative Party or Conservative Home when all these articles have been increasingly becoming more and more libertarian? And I have said this before, that libertarianism here in the UK is not a popular ideology, that we are very, very much a country that understands and wants and likes our government, that we want the government to do things because we vote for them and we expect the government to get on with their job. I think that also does help a lot, really quite contribute to the fact that we do in this country have a lot of political apathy when it comes to it, that we expect the government to come along and then say, this is how we've been doing. And then if they haven't been doing well, we vote and get rid of them. And I generally think that's how most people seem to think, unfortunately, as is the case. But feel free to disagree with me on that. But interesting idea today, because now we're looking at reducing the demand for government, what new polling tells us. And we're going to cover something in here that is mentioned because it is very, very interesting indeed when this gets mentioned. So before we do that, though, please do remember to click on the like, share, and subscribe button. And of course, down below, there are links to my Patreon page and a one-off donation link called Buy Me Coffee, where you can, well, buy me coffee. There's the YouTube thank you button. And of course, there's the Pony Club as well down below. So as always, thank you very much to all the people who do help and support the channel. So, interestingly, what does this have to say? When we polled people, hey, do you want to reduce the size of the government? Because remember, ultimately, what they are really asking people is, hey, what service is it that you no longer want the government to do? And as we've seen throughout the whole Brexit process, since Brexit first happened, with the environmental agencies or the regulatory bodies that are needed to ensure that we are still maintaining regulatory standards, that's, things like the rivers aren't polluted, which, as you can see at the moment, massive disaster. Why? Because the government hasn't funded these properly. It hasn't made sure that these organizations are funded or even staffed so that they can make sure and do these tests. But what about other things? Because this becomes highly interesting, where they asked this very simple question: what do they think about the size of the government? So, this is what one of these people who was doing this research found and said. He said, quote, "My research confirmed in various ways that most voters, including a significant chunk of Tories, do not see the government primarily as an expensive nuisance." And bear in mind, that is a complete libertarian mindset, to see the government as this expensive nuisance that just should not exist. But as I've said before, in this country, libertarianism is not a popular ideology. But because of all this dark money that has been pouring over from America, very much libertarian fundamentalist think tanks, and even as we saw with Liz Truss implementing some of these changes, they were not widely popular. They were very quickly seen as bad things. And most of these actual policies that they have been talking about would never, ever see the light of day, because people would just not vote for them. If the Conservatives were to generally seriously become the Libertarian Party, um, they would be very, very quickly find themselves completely out of power and not being voted for, because people do not want these things. Even Tories, as it was said there, they want good public services. How do you get good public services? Well, you've got to fund them. And you've got to fund them properly through taxes. And what I've really liked to see, and what I've always found fascinating about, my visits to conservative home when I've gone to see what's going on today in conservative land, I have found a lot of the time the comments and the pushback from many people in the comments, especially to these reducing the demand for the government, has been overly hostile and very, very much negative. But he continues on this. So he says that more than 2/3 agreed that people have a right to things like a decent housing, healthcare, and education, and enough to live on. And the government has a responsibility to make sure everyone has them. Imagine that as a statement. And bear in mind, you find yourself asking this question: if conservatives are agreeing, and a good chunk, as it says here, conservatives agree with this statement, then what on earth is happening to the Conservative Party that they are dabbling in this libertarian mindset? And it is because of the dark moneyed influences that have been coming from America. And I think this is the direction of travel that certainly one part of the Conservative Party would love to go in. And certainly, as we said, after the next election, we're going to see them possibly, maybe even see this true libertarian mindset come in and creep in into the Conservative Party. And they are going to get punished for this, because when you've got most of your party that doesn't even agree with the libertarian mindset, I mean, here you have people have a right to things like decent housing, healthcare, education, and enough to live on. And this is on a conservative website taken by a conservative poller who was asking people what their opinion on the government is and what the government should provide. Like I say, even conservatives are not that far gone. And I've said this before, there are plenty of conservatives out there who are very, very good people, who are very, very much dismayed by the state of the government, the way that the country is being run. And of course, I agree with that statement as well. What we always tend to disagree on, and where we will always tend to see this disagreement, is with the policy. Like, how do you get that? How do you achieve that decent housing, healthcare, and education, and enough to people to live on? That's where the fundamental differences come in between people, like on the right and on the left. But this is what the conservatives are coming. And he even admits it here. He says, so libertarians and conservatives are facing an uphill slog to make the broader case for a smaller state. And he initially says it there, libertarians, admitting that this is not a conservative ideology. It's a libertarian ideology. And I will say this now, that libertarianism and conservatism, two different ideologies. And of course, you get big C conservatives, big government conservatives, and you get little c conservative governments who are, very much taking some of the stuff from the libertarians of wanting a smaller state, but not wanting to get rid of it completely, as you would many with these libertarians. So I think this drive they have gone on has been very, very much really a consistent failure. And of course, massive pushback. So I just want to read one of these comments, because this is fascinating. So this guy here who wrote this comment, Tim, he said, this whole strategy to try and reduce the demand for government is misguided. Bear in mind, this guy has an account on Conservative Home. I am 100% sure this guy is conservative. And it's incredible the amount of pushback that I've seen in these articles about reducing the demand for government is because a lot of conservatives, because the party has shifted since 2016 so far to the right, you are getting conservatives who feel that they are politically homeless because the direction of travel for the conservatives have just gone more and more and more and more hard right. And they don't feel at home anymore in the Conservative Party, which, to be honest, sort of a good thing, because, like I say, that will keep the Conservatives out of power for quite some time. But onto this comment, because like I say, I find this fascinating. So this whole strategy of trying to reduce the demand for government is misguided. If the government organizes matters so that people prosper, then the people will support the government. If the government mucks everything up, then in a democracy such as ours, it will be turfed out. We live in a society created by liberal politicians where everyone's, quote, rights are preserved perceived to be supreme. Sorry. These wonderful rights have to be paid for, which is what is happening in the area of immigration, where the government finds itself having to pay billions for illegal migrants to be put up in some comfort. How does the demand for reduced government actually impact on immigration? And that is a fantastic question here. If you are going to have this reduced government, which we have seen since David Cameron did austerity, and we've seen the size of the Home Office be greatly reduced in this area, how has that affected immigration? He makes a fantastic point, and he actually brings it up. So he continues saying, it does not do so and cannot do so. The Conservative Party has been talking about immigration for about 60 years now and failing to come up with comprehensive solutions. This is what happens when you reduce the demand for government. Let nature take its course, and then it will then get surprised when you get overwhelmed by events. The government must govern, not abdicate and go to sleep. And that this guy who's commented here, Tim, that to me is someone who is a traditional UK Tory, that we are in the government and we must govern, not abdicate responsibilities and go to sleep. That to me is what I would describe as a traditional UK conservative. And all these crazy nonsense that they've been doing in these articles of reduce the size of the government, this has been what you have been getting. These people pushing back and say, that's not the conservatism I recognize. Again, fascinating to see. And he gets it right. You know, oh, just let the free markets takes its course, which is again nature, and then you get surprised when overwhelmed by events, because private companies cannot replicate what a government can do. All they are going to be interested in is the bottom line. And that creates problems time after time after time after time. There are studies out there which have shown that when they have looked at private companies that have taken over of a system of a job that the government used to do, it's turned out worse. The government always does it better than a private company. And it goes for everything, for housing, education, healthcare, you name it. And what we have seen from this Tory government for the past 13 years is the attempted and complete dismantling of that state. And it is going to be up to Keir Starmer, really, for his pretty much his first term, to really rebuild that. That is what he has got to do. He has got to rebuild everything that the Tories have broken. Very, very significantly. And he has a hard job ahead of him. He has a very, very hard job ahead of him to try and do that. And I always keep on telling you there is going to be a huge conservative civil war, because if you've got guys like that who they would consider themselves, conservatives, as we read the comment here from Tim, versus what we saw up above of, yeah, we want to, completely get rid of everything, reduce the government. We want, private companies to take over the housing situation. Only the private markets can solve, the housing crisis. They can't. They're largely responsible for the housing disaster that we are in. Where do you go? Where do you run to if you are Tim here? Because the Conservative Party is no longer the Conservative Party at this point. If they are considering this direction of travel, if this whole summer, like I say, Conservative Home has been pumping out these articles with the headline of reducing the demand for government, be it whatever, healthcare, housing, and of course the healthcare one is, well, everything needs to go private. Not surprised there. But that's the direction of travel. At least a good section of the Libertarian faction of the Conservative Party seems to be wanting traveling in. And yet, as was pointed out in that poll, not even conservatives want to go in that direction. And they have openly said, and I will read that part again, that more than 2/3 agreed that people have the right to things like a decent housing, healthcare, education, and enough to live on, and that the government has a responsibility to make sure everyone has them. And that, my friends, was done on a conservative poll, on a conservative website, done through trying to sell a libertarian mindset and convert people like Tim, who I would probably consider. I don't know who this guy is, but I would consider that Tim is probably your classic old school conservative here. And then you also get this guy who also comments saying, Ben, this is the great irony of conservative politics. Most of the spending goes on non-means tested health and pensions provisions for the same sliver of voters who say they want a smaller state. Then the same generation that voted for the low pay service economy which Thatcher delivered, which means that mass migration is then needed to deliver the entitlements of this very same generation, were then most resistant to migration. There is no pot to pay into. Today's retired pay for yesterday's pensions and healthcare, and today's workers pay for today's pensions and healthcare, both which have increased in scope because of the way that life expectancy and medical sciences just changed since the welfare state was founded. Cutting back the supply of the state, except for health and retired people's entitlements, as Osborne did, worked politically, but this has simply ended up increasing the demand for the state by making working age people's situations more precarious. And this is what I've said under most of these articles. I would say you've got what I would consider, or at least what I would recognize people saying as you're on the conservative. Now, of course, there's, like I say, I agree with that statement. Of course, I want people to have good healthcare, be paid a decent wage, and have housing. But where we disagree is on the policy. And that is where the traditional arguments have always been, especially in UK politics. But it just goes to show you how crazy the direction of travel is going for the Conservatives in this. And yet, that's the way they want to travel. And if they want to do that, good luck to them, because, like I say, it will keep them out of power for quite some time. So, as far as I'm concerned, if that's the direction they want to travel in, crack on, guys, crack on. But when even most of your own party members do not want to travel in that direction, well, you've got a significant problem in the entire UK conservative movement. And we on the left have to take advantage. If they are going to be in a pure state of disarray and panic, and we don't know what we're doing because we're pushing this ideology, which we are assured will work and will be absolutely fantastic, but no one's voting for us, excellent. Let no one continue to vote for him. Let them continue to push this crazy, ridiculous ideology. We'll get on passing a load of progressive policies. That's what we need to do. But like I say, first things first, we've got to get Labour in. We've got to get Starmer in. And Starmer has a lot to do. He has to deliver to make sure that we rebuild what the Conservatives have been trashing for the past 13 years. And that is an incredibly hard job he's got to do. Incredibly hard. So roll on the next general election, I say. But of course, until then, we'll see you all next time.